that Natasha gave. So that's the view from the mountain there. Again, this is the university itself, USI, or Università della Svizzera Italiana. We do all the stuff in English, so there's no need to be afraid of Italian. I think it was founded in '96. Again, a very young university, and it has basically this is the university here. Main buildings, computer science building, lecture halls, lab, library, and again this is the house mountain, San Salvatore. Lugano is located pretty much at the bottom of Switzerland, so about 1 hour from Milan and about 2.5 hours from Zurich, the biggest city in Switzerland. And the good thing, from my perspective at least, it's also only 2.5 hours to the Mediterranean Sea. Genoa is down here, so that makes for a nice, quick weekend getaway. And St. Petersburg, I guess, is not even on the map. It's up here somewhere. 3 hours, not by driving. I fear it's flight. 3 hours. Okay. Right. So it's as we said before, 4 faculties, 2,500 students. There is the Faculty of Economics with about 850. There is the Faculty of Communications with 800 students, and then there's the Faculty of Architecture, which have their own little secluded campus in a neighboring little town. It's a little villa, maybe not as grand as this one, but also very cute, I think. Also very big. And then we are the 4th faculty, Informatics. That's our building. It's about 200 students, a very small place, very very personal. And again, we're the youngest faculty. We've been established in 2004, and this is kind of the life there, I guess, as a PhD student. This was the Christmas party or something. You just get together, everybody brings cookies and stuff, and this is the breakdown of the number. I'm not sure why this is in a different font, but so we have, as you can see, there's actually many more PhD students than graduate and undergraduate students, and our yearly intake is about these numbers. So last year we got 37 new bachelors, 24 new master, and 10 new PhDs. So the PhD number is pretty high. So we're a very strong research-oriented faculty. The faculty, this is us last year. You see, if you count 16 people, you can probably see Fabio here, Natasha there, Fernando from last week is up here, and this is yours truly. And we just hired since then 2 more, so there are now 18, and we're currently hiring 2 more. So then by the time you would get there, for example, it would be 20 professors, which makes it the 3rd largest university for informatics actually in Switzerland. Okay, just one more word. Right, and we have postdocs too. They just don't have an image of them. They're important. They should be like up here. Very important people, postdocs. They do all the work. Good. So just about tomorrow, one plan of ours is also to get people who are interested in coming over to apply for scholarships at Lugano. There are both master's thesis and PhD scholarships available, and the idea is that we would meet tomorrow and at 10 a.m. Ideally, you bring, if you're interested in a short CV with you, and you've looked over the lectures that we gave this weekend and Fernando last weekend, and then we would do little interviews, a quiz or mini exam where we kind of ask you a few questions just to see how kind of promising you are or whatever, and then we just talk to you about your interests, and then we'll take all this information back home, and then when you apply, we'd be able to give recommendations to the committee there. So tomorrow I think 10 o'clock, although I think it's going to be sharp, not 10:15, because Fabio has a plane to catch, so we want to start early. So maybe I should write 9:45, and then we can start at 10. Again, so if you're interested, do come. If you're not interested, feel free to come, but I'm not sure if that it's fun. I mean, maybe it's fun for you to do on a Sunday morning, but maybe if it rains, you should come. Okay, so that was it. Any questions on that stuff tomorrow? I think there will be the slides. I think I'm the last again. All the slides will be on the web page, so you can take a look again. I think some might even have given like papers that are readable, and so you can kind of try to prepare. But that's about it. Good. Okay, then let's start with today's topic, privacy in ubiquitous computing. I always like to start this topic with a quote from one of these forecasting companies. You know, there are these consulting agencies who you pay lots of money to, and then they give you this forecast of the world in 10 years. And then you can decide whether you want to buy this computer or invest in oil or whatever. So there's this quote from Gartner Research, one of the high-profile ones from 10 years back, and they said, 10-year forecast, by 2010, privacy will become a meaningless concept in Western societies. 60% probability. Okay, there, you know, maybe we're in the 40% bracket. Now, privacy will be forever lost because technology will allow us to make sense of the data we collect. So, I guess I can give this talk another 6 months and then I'm out of business, because by the end of this year it will be meaningless to most people. I hope it's not going to be meaningless for you guys yet, but we'll see. Maybe they have an updated version of this 2010 looking to 2020 and then maybe, I don't know, increasing the probability now. I don't know. Okay, so let's see if that concept has still meaning to you. I hope I can motivate that meaning and also motivate a bit why this is something that a computer scientist should worry about. I mean, what's it to me? I just like to do algorithms. Okay, so today's menu, there are 2 blocks basically. There's one block where it's very un-informatics. There's not going to be a single formula, warning, on trying to understand the meaning of privacy. We'll look at some of its history, the legal definitions, legal aspects of it, which is again very weird if you think of informatics or something, but it's I think important stuff to understand the material, and then motivate why we want this. And then the second half will then be the hands-on technological approaches. We'll look at the challenges that ubiquitous computing and modern computing system pose, and then look at 2 examples. Let's see, definitely location privacy, and if we're good in time, also RFID privacy. If not, we'll just skip stuff. Good. All right. So let's understand privacy first, what it really means, and then we can try to actually integrate this into our computing systems. So what is privacy? There's a very famous definition of privacy. It's called the right to be let alone. That's a very short and nice definition, and that's maybe why it's so popular, because it's so short, even a computer scientist can remember that. So if you start your paper on that topic, you just like, privacy has been defined as the right to be let alone. So that's always the first sentence. That's easy. However, it also has meaning because it was the first such definition. It's actually quite old. It was written by 2 lawyers in 1890 in the Harvard Law Review by Louis Brandeis and Sam Warren. And they wrote this very influential in legal circles, very influential article, The Right to be Let Alone, where they argued that there should be more legal protection for privacy, which at the time there wasn't. And if you look at what they wrote in the text, actually there's this interesting passage which reads, numerous mechanical devices threaten to make good the prediction that what is whispered in the closet shall be proclaimed from the housetops. So if you read this today, you think like, what are these guys talking about? Is this like, are they talking about Ubicom? Are they talking about smart devices or something? That, I mean, clearly 1890, that's a lot of forecasting, 120 years into the future. Well, obviously they weren't omniscient or something. They couldn't predict what's happening. And the numerous mechanical devices they talk about are in fact very, very different. However, back at the time it was, if you want, also a technology revolution. And the technological revolution in the days of Warren and Brandeis looked like this. This guy, George Eastman, created this revolution. Have people heard of the name of George Eastman? There's a big company named after him. The George Eastman Kodak Company. Have you heard about that company? What does the company produce? Cameras. Right? So this young gentleman, he looked a bit, younger, I think at the time, he invented the Kodak camera. And the Kodak camera was the first camera that was portable. Like a mobile phone, instead of having your phone always, at a cord, you now can take it with you. Previously, if you wanted to get a picture taken, you'd have to go to a photographer. I'm not sure if you've seen like old Western movies where there's this guy with a big tripod, this big thing, like a powder keg in his hand, and then he kind of disappears, and you have to sit still for half a minute to get your picture taken. And now George Eastman created this portable camera that you just could take out on the street and take a picture of people on the street without their consent. You just take a picture. Before, you had to probably hit them over the head in order to have them sit still for a while, right? Or, again, get them consent, right? But now you had this mechanical device that was able to just take pictures of anybody without them being able to do anything about it. So this was a kind of a game changer that Brandeis and Warren noticed. At the time, they were actually quite famous already. There were high-profile lawyers in Boston area, and there was already something today called the yellow press. So the newspapers had started printing, and there was a guy called Pulitzer. I'm sure if you heard about that gentleman too. He bought a big, I think, News of the World or something, big newspaper that was yellow press. They put pictures in of celebrities and wrote little gossip about them. And they also wrote something about Brandeis, which he didn't like at all, because all this gossip is really bad. So he said there should be a right to privacy, a right to be let alone by these paparazzis. Right? So he was kind of the first paparazzi victim there. Okay, the important thing here is technology changes our lives. Something that wasn't an issue before, getting your picture taken against your will. How should that happen? Right? It's possible this guy has to run after me with his little tripod. Fat chance. Now, with suddenly a mobile camera, things became different. So technology changes what's possible in terms of society, and then what's needed in terms of privacy protection. Okay, right. So this is George with his Kodak. Okay, this is an interesting definition because it's old. However, today the right to be let alone might be something that is a problem for celebrities. Not for us, really. I'm pretty alone, thank you. For us, often it's more the question of our data, information privacy, computers and all that stuff. So a more modern definition comes from Alan Weston. He's still around. He kind of looks the age too now. He was a very active person, and he still is, back in the 60s. He wrote an influential book, Privacy and Freedom, where he defined privacy as the desire of people to choose freely under what circumstances and to what extent they will expose themselves, their attitudes, and their behavior to others. So here it's kind of more workable definition. I understand that. That's about data. It's about, my exposing myself, my attitudes, and my behavior to others. So it's about controlling who knows what about me when. So this is a modern definition. It's a bit longer, so people don't remember it as well, but it's I think, a useful definition. So this already shows that privacy has a number of different facets. Like, for example, what Weston talks about, informational privacy. It's about my data and where it kind of flows around, who knows what about me. Address, hobbies, information. However, there's also something that's a bit older, communication privacy. And that is firstly available when the postal services came up and states started to pass laws against opening these letters. Before that, you had to put a big blob of wax on it with a seal so that you could detect if people were opening your mail. Later, the state actually put laws in effect that prohibited anybody from opening your letters, except, of course, the state. Right? That they can always do anything. And then, of course, the same thing happened with phone calls. You're typically, at least if you're not law enforcement, not allowed to listen in on telephone calls. So communication privacy is different from that because it's not really about data. It's about listening in, reading your letters, hearing in on what you're talking about. Of course, with email, it's very different. In fact, email is more like a postcard. Anybody can just kind of read it these days. It just passes through all these routers and switches, and it's plain text. So email is not like snail mail. And then there's something called, that's even older, territorial privacy. And that is, I'm not sure if you know the term, my home is my castle. That was something from the British. The English came up with that in the 18th century, where they had laws that prevented the king from simply entering a house. They needed to have a warrant, like a written accusation, and then, you know, the king, well, his forces, not him personally, I guess, could enter your home to search for, I don't know, stuff. Today, again, you have pretty much protection, typically, of your home, so the police can't just knock on your door and storm the house. They need some legal document from a judge saying that, you know, there's probable cause that you're hiding something or whatever. In fact, in many countries, actually, that extends to your office. So typically your employer has no right to go searching through your desk, even though the desk is in his office and you're on his property. But typically, privacy law in many countries extend to your desk. It's your territory. It's where you can put things. And of course, then this bodily privacy, maybe this right to be let alone, that's even older in a sense, you know, that nakedness, people cover funky clothes to hide their nudity. But also if you travel to, like, I don't know, Southeast Asia or something, which are pretty tough on drugs, you might be subject to a strip search where they kind of look everywhere for smuggled drugs. Or in fact, in many jobs you might be subject to a drug test, where you have to give out, you know, blood samples or something. It's kind of also a form of bodily privacy, because they can take something out of your body to look at it. So you see very different facets of privacy, ranging from something very personal, the body, to something very abstract, information. And you can see how that over time, you know, people first worried about this one, and then territory, this was like 14th century, well, maybe even earlier. And then, you know, 18th century, 20th century, and 21st century. Okay, so another way to understand what privacy means then, okay, so different facets, okay, I guess I understand, is by asking ourselves, well, what does it mean if my privacy has been violated? When do I feel like, you know, my privacy, it's gone? What is that feeling? Where does it come from? And there's this interesting Professor Emeritus of Sociology, Gary Marx, formerly MIT, and he asked himself the question, you know, what is it? You know, how can we define these invasions? And he said that it's a boundary crossing. We feel that some privacy border has been crossed, and he defines 4 such borders: natural borders, social borders, spatial borders, transitory borders. So what does that mean? So there's an example here. A natural border, for example, is a physical limitation. If you close the door, you have a chat with a friend, and then you step outside, and people outside say, oh, wow, that was really interesting. What happened here? There was a physical border. How did information permeate that? If you have a letter in the mail and the postal mailman, you know, gives it to you, wow, interesting news, your daughter, great. And you're like, it's a sealed letter, how do you know? Right? So there's information that passes a natural border. And if that happens without you telling people, you feel like, wow, you know, that's a privacy violation. Very simple. There are social borders. If you talk to a doctor, and then later, you know, half the city knows that you have, you know, something on your behind, you know, some problems. Not fun, right? Unless you start telling people about it. So you expect doctors, lawyers to have this confidence where you can confide in them, and they're not supposed to tell everybody. Could also be the colleagues where you kind of say, you know, this professor sucks, and then at the next exam he's like, oh, okay, so I heard. Right? So you place a certain confidentiality, and you expect a social border to exist there, unspoken. Obviously, you're not going to tell but don't tell him. Of course, you don't tell him, right? So that's the border that's being crossed, and you feel like a violation. Then there's these spatial temporal borders. Let's assume that you're now a pretty hot person out on the street every evening, you know, taking some cool stuff, drinking a lot, and in 10 years' time you're this family father, mother of 4, and, you know, really giving an example of no drugs to your kids, right? But then somehow this surfaces this stories from back in the 60s when you were wild or something. That's not really fun. So there's typically this adolescence time when we are, you know, rough and are allowed to overstep limits, you know, go binge drinking, and then, you know, once you start become this leader of a team of 20, you'd rather not have pictures of you, like vomiting in the street as a screensaver, something like that. So spatial borders, sometimes temporal borders, sometimes also spatial. Stuff at work is different from home. So if you don't expect your home problems to suddenly appear at work, people know what you're fighting with your partner about. And last but not least, I'm not sure if you know that gentleman here, and why I put him into transitory borders. These are the moment where you don't think before you speak. I forgot why I'm not sure why I put this face up there. But then suddenly someone records it, writes it down, publishes a book, for example, called Bushisms, with stupid things you say, and it's written down forever, or taken on video and published on the web. So that's also not very fun. You expect these things just go away in the passing of time, and suddenly your past comes to haunt you. Again, a border that's being crossed that you'd rather not have crossed. Okay, so this is a different way of thinking about privacy, what it means, and this helps us to think about how can our work, how can our software enable, or better, prevent these things. How can we build software that does not make it easy for others to suddenly see what we're doing? I'm not sure how many of you have Facebook, maybe, and there was like a month ago that this problem where suddenly all the chat messages, the private chat messages, were online public for a week or so. Right? So this would be an example of you expect there's some border, there's kind of private chat messages, Lisa is really a dork, and then suddenly the next day it's public, everybody can Google it, and it's really not fun. So how can we build systems that prevent these borders? And that's going to be good. Okay, right. So this is motivating privacy. Lots of different aspects. Another good way of understanding privacy then is actually to not just kind of think of what if and how the world is, but look at the level of legal protection that we enjoy or not enjoy in the legal domain. And that is because lawyers, of course, and judges and these people have also thought about privacy a lot, and they came up with laws based on popular expectations. How should society be? So that's also a good source for us to understand how this works. So let's look at briefly about the legal reality and the legal history of privacy. Now, if you look at the first mentioning of privacy in legal texts, again, it goes back to the 14th century, where the Justices of the Peace Act, these are layman judges, Justice of the Peace, so they're not official, there's kind of neighborhood judges to arbitrate. They had already sentences in there for eavesdropping and peeping toms. That's peeping tom, by the way. That's Tom. Right, so this was already this bodily privacy, right? These guys, bodily privacy there. And then there's, again, my home is my castle. This was William Pitt the Elder. He was a parliamentarian in the 18th century in England. Again, let's just read the quote. The poorest man may in his cottage bid defiance to all the forces of the crown. It may be frail, its roof may shake, but the King of England cannot enter. All his forces dare not cross the threshold of the ruined tenement. So it's not about the fortification you build, it's about the law fortifying your home from the King of England. Of course, until he has little paper documents, then he can. Okay, so privacy goes back a long time. Bodily privacy, territorial privacy. These are ideas that have been enshrined in our society for a long time. Now, the modern stuff with information privacy dates back to the 60s and the 70s, when computers started to appear and states started to use them to collect information about their citizens. And the first modern privacy law was actually in my home state in Germany. It's called Hesse. That's the little, sign of Hesse there, Frankfurt. That's the state of Hesse in Germany. It was the first, well, it's not a country, it's a state, but the first legal system that had a modern privacy law in 1970. I wasn't yet born, but almost, so that's kind of a long time ago. Hessen, yes, in German it's Hessen. The British, they can't spell German correctly, so sorry. Hessen, but the British say Hesse. Sounds like a guy from the Western or something. Hesse, Hesse James. Okay, right. So this modern privacy laws, they're based and everything we have today is pretty much based on one set of core principles that have been developed over years and currently are in the final form, basically, are based on these fair information practices, fair information principles. Again, they have been actually developed a while in the 70s, and so this is kind of the final reiteration done by the OECD. The OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation Development, not really the outfit you'd expect to do privacy laws, or something. I mean, obviously they don't do laws. They are a multinational organization. They don't have any power, in a sense. But they are able to draft voluntary guidelines for the member and encourage member states who are interested in economic cooperation development, free flow of goods, money, kind of stuff, to adopt laws that will be in line with these ideas. And the idea was that information is increasingly becoming a commodity or a part of trade. And if we don't find a nice solution to ease this flow of information between countries, then trade will suffer and we'll all be poor and have no money to spend. Bad. So let's come up with guidelines for our member states so that they all know how to do good privacy laws, and then we can make good business. So here are the 8 principles they came up with. Very simple. First one is collection limitation. You shall only collect as much data as you need for the job. If you want to send me a book, don't ask about my birthday, maybe, unless it's a over 18 book or something other stuff, right? So why do you need this? Data quality. Make sure the data you collect is accurate. So don't collect false data on me, like the false birthday, and later claim this is true. If you do, let me maybe check if the data you have is correct. So ensure the data is correct. Purpose specification. Tell the person you're collecting data from why you're collecting this. What is the purpose? To ship my book out? Fine. To make a list of people I can spam with email? Not fine. Right? So there's a sudden difference between what I think is a good purpose. Yes, you can have my email for that, to send me a receipt. And spamming, no thank you, I don't need advertising from you. So purpose, be explicit about this, and then consequently be restrictive about what you use the data for. Only use it for the purpose that you ask it for. And then the other 4 is make sure that you put in sufficient security safeguards, because otherwise all your promises are not worth anything if you store the data on a USB stick and then lose it in the middle of town. Anybody can then see the data and do stuff with it. In fact, I'm not sure if you noticed, there's UK had, like last year, a string of huge losses where members of the government lost laptops, USB sticks, CDs in trains, buses, and everywhere that contained millions of citizen records. Like all the soldiers that are currently paid by the military, they lost the stick with all the data. The people who get social benefits, 25 million records, they lost the USB stick. So obviously you have to make sure that if you do all these promises, you got to protect the data. Otherwise, thanks for the promise, it's worth nothing. Openness. Make sure that you tell people you're collecting data. Don't do a hidden data collection. Individual participation. Get their consent. Get them to sign up. Click the box. Yes, I want. Click the button. Sign me up. Don't just kind of force them into that. And last but not least, be accountable. If you screw up, stick up to it and say, okay, I'm the guy who's responsible. I lost the memory stick, so I have to pay maybe something. So these are these 8 principles. In fact, if you learn those, 80% of privacy legislation. I'm not sure if it's enough to take the bar and become a lawyer yet, but this is basically what you need to know in principle about privacy laws. They all have these 8 principles, plus a few more, of course a bit longer than these 8 words here. However, understanding them again helps us to know what kind of software we have to build. It has to better comply with these 8 principles in order to be legal in many countries of the world. Okay, so how do these then affect the real laws? Well, in principle, there are 2 main approaches in the world to both legislation and to privacy legislation in particular. Although, in fact, every country is different. you can still group things into broadly two different parts. There's the US-centric part of the world. They have a very hands-off approach to legislation in general. You know, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So they have very specific laws for very specific problems, also in privacy, with just enough protection to get the job done, to fix the problem. Instead, they like self-regulation. Please, everybody, behave. Be a good citizen. Don't, you know, collect more data than you need. Don't sell everything, even if you could. And if it starts becoming a problem, we're going to put some laws up, right? So they threaten with laws and hope that people are scared enough to do the right thing. And the idea is that the more laws you put up, the more red tape you put up, the more it hinders commerce, the less money we make. So that's one view. Then there's the European view, basically favored in Europe, and that is something called omnibus privacy laws, laws that apply to both the government and private corporations. Very strong protection usually, and top down, starting from these fair information principles. You know, this is how the world should be. And then drilling down into very specific laws for public and private sector, but under a single framework that says this is how law or this is how privacy law should be. And then you have something called a privacy commissioner in many of these countries, who is basically the overseer. He controls the government, he controls companies to see if they're following these privacy laws. This is very different approaches. So here's an example of the mix of relevant privacy laws that apply to the public sector in the US. We're not going to go through all of them. Obviously, so this is maybe the most important one, the Privacy Act of 1974, followed briefly after the first protection law of Hesse, the state of Hesse, or Hessen in German. It's a very comprehensive set of guidelines that governs the US federal government, the Washington, D.C. It doesn't apply to the states. It doesn't apply to the state of Tennessee or the state of Massachusetts, right? It's only the federal government in Washington, D.C. that is bound by this very good act, actually. And then they have all these different things like, and maybe let's take this one, Drivers Privacy Protection Act. Just to illustrate the story behind it, it was passed in 1994 to protect the information on your driver record. I'm not sure how this works in Russian. Do you have, if you see the number plate of a car, can you find out who the driver is? No. Typically, no. The police, yes. The police can, right? But usually we cannot. And in most countries, Switzerland actually being an exception, in most countries you cannot. The US didn't have this. Again, there's no law against it, usually, unless there's a problem. It wasn't a problem before. You could just go to a registration unit and they could sell the data if they wanted to, maybe to make money to advertisers. They could sell all the people who had registered a Hummer, big car, so that, you know, some person could send them advertising for even bigger cars, something like that. So it was a commodity, right? That was free. And then in 94 there was this very high-profile case where I don't really know her, some actress from a soap opera, very popular, I guess, at the time. She had a stalker who would follow her around, but he didn't know where she lived. So the only thing he did is just waited at the studio until she left with her car. He wrote down the number plate, went to the next registration center and said, "Hi, I'd like to know, you know, here's $10, whatever it costs." And he got her address, went there, killed her. Mean things, whatever. Okay? Wow, you know, really bad, because this was a great soap opera, right? And now it's over. So immediately they passed a law that made this, prohibited the car registration centers from selling this data or from giving it out. So you see, this illustrates again how you can, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But if there's a specific problem, now your driver information, your driving license information is protected by this. The private sector, very different laws. Again, you know, you can see they're just very specific on certain issues. Here, for example, again another example, the Video Privacy Protection Act. It's not about this kind of video. It's in fact about video rental records. And again, up to 98, there wasn't any protection about this. So you could go to Blockbuster, this video rental stores. You still know the video cassettes? Used to be cassettes, a while back. Now it's just a memory stick, I guess. But back in the days when I was growing up, we had video cassettes, and you could rent them at these rental places. And there was this, and again, they could do anything with the rental data. They could sell it if they wanted to, because there was no law against it. And then there was apparently a senator who was running for, re-election or something, and he very law and order, very right, no porn, no evil stuff in the world, no drugs. And then a reporter said, "Oh, let's check out his video rental records. Let's see what he watches at night, And so he went to this couple of places and checked out his rentals. Unfortunately, this guy was really true to the spirit. He only had Disney movies on the list. So that was kind of disappointing. But as soon as he got wind of it and his fellow senators heard about this, it's not a good idea. You can just go there and pull out my records, you're saying? Quickly, they passed a law that protected video rental records from anybody wanting to see them. So now you can only give out the category, like adult or something, but that could be Schwarzenegger movie, who knows, right? So that's kind of coarser. But back then, your health data, for example, by your hospital, there's nothing that prevents them from selling the data. For example, if you're diagnosed with cancer, a week later you might get something in the mail from Novartis or some other big company saying, "Oh, we heard about the bad news. How about our new medicine?" So that's kind of totally fine. So your video rental records are protected. Your health privacy, not really, although there's now actually a health insurance act, but that's kind of, not as strong really. Anyway, so that's illustrating the US approach to privacy, very fragmented, very sectorial. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Contrast that with the European approach. There is something that was passed in '95, which is called the EU Data Protection Directive, or the Privacy Directive for short. And that had the idea of setting a benchmark for all member states that belong to the EU for processing personal data in electronic and manual form. So that's basically one law, one framework saying this is how data in Europe should be processed. Whether it's in a file, like real paper, or whether it's in a computer. It doesn't matter. It's all data to us. And it has to be, whether it's from the government or the state or individuals. I don't care. Well, not companies, individuals. If you have a little address book, you're fine to keep it. There's no need to worry about privacy laws, personal stuff. And again, they're based on the OECD guidelines. They added some stuff. Interesting, for example, you shall not have automated decisions based on data that are negatively affecting people. You always need a human to inspect this. So there should not be a computer that decides whether or not you get credit. There has to be a human to look at that too. Retention limitation, you can only store data for as long as you need it. If you ship the book, there's no need to keep the address, right? If you bill me for my phone calls, there's no need to keep the records, and so forth. So this was also enshrined in that stuff. And the idea was then, again, like in the OECD, once we have that benchmark so that all national laws are created equal, then we can facilitate data flow between the member states. Commerce will be better, we'll all be happy and rich. Okay, so the benchmark for national law, again, this is not really law, this is just a framework. So then each country, Germany, France, whatever, they have to pass a national law. So each of the 26 European member states have then privacy laws, which are at least as good as this benchmark, OECD++ or something. Right, so each national law has to be transcribing this idea into the national law, and if you didn't do it in time, you were fined some money, although I think this was minuscule in comparison to what we're paying now for Greece, I guess, so that doesn't really add up. Of course, if you have a very keen sense of that, you can make it stricter than the directive wants to. This is only the baseline level. But in effect, we still get actually 27 now, 27 plus 3 national regimes, different laws. So if you do business in Europe, it's still a pain to make sure that all your stuff is in line with all the laws. Right. Just a reminder, EU means the European Union, of course. EEA is the European Economic Area, so there's Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland in there. And then there's something called the EFTA, and that's where Switzerland comes in. So we're not really part of any of that in Switzerland, so that's just stuff. And then again, you have these data protection commissioners who have these powers to oversee these things. Okay. Well, so the other interesting thing is, of course, that this restricts the export of personal data to non-EU countries. So anybody who is deemed unsafe, meaning who does not have as good a protection of privacy as this directive, shall not have any data from Europeans anymore. So what big countries come to your mind there that do not have this? Not actually sure what Russia has, but for example, the US, right? They don't have this protection. So back in '95, then there was this talk about, so, US, what are you going to do? Not doing anything, of course, right? They said, well, we're going to cut the cable. No more data from Europe. No more Amazon. No more whatever, right? No more Google. So they hashed out some agreement. Now there's something called the Safe Harbor Agreement. It's kind of a construction where the Europe can say that they have adequate protection without US having to actually have a law about it. So it's kind of a weird thing, but so far no one has complained, but it's kind of weird. But in theory, again, places like Russia or even China or even Japan, I'm not sure about Japan, they are not considered safe countries. They don't have the same amount of protection. So in theory, they cannot get data from EU citizens anymore. So they're not allowed to collect data from Europeans in Europe, because then they would be fined and have to pay money. Switzerland is one of the 6 or 7 safe countries. They submitted their laws and they said, look, this is adequate, and then they got the checkbox. Okay, so this is the privacy law basically there. There are 3 more directives. If you remember 95, there wasn't really the internet in 95. 95, that's like 15 years ago. People didn't have a mobile phone really at 95. I remember. I think the web was kind of starting up. So these things didn't really take into account modern telecommunications. So in 97 they started with telecommunication systems, kind of mobile phones provider and that stuff, and later updated again 2002 to add email and the web and electronic communications in general. So now these 2 guys are added to it, and they set up additional stuff on these things. And then, of course, there was September 11, 2001, terrorist attack, and then in 2006, as a consequence, this idea of retention, you only need to store data as long as needed, became reversed, and they passed the Data Retention Directive, and now that adds provisions that you have to store data at least 6 months, maybe 2 years, or even longer, in case there is a terrorist attack and I want to find out who drove the car or something, or who made the phone call. So now there's a lot of data being retained, and there's a lot of criticism, especially by ISPs, by the guys who have all the network traffic, because you can imagine how much network traffic they have to store now for half a year, for a year. They have to log every single HTTP request that you're doing, every single FTP, every single, not the email body, but the email headers, who you're sending email to and back. So that's a lot of data to keep for a year or 2. So they don't like to pay for all that storage space. And of course they have to build in all these online lookup things so that law enforcement can directly hack in and say, I want now this phone call of this guy. Okay, so this is the legal picture. And then for the last 10 minutes before we take a little break and get some air, I want to wrap it up then with this idea of, well, okay, there's laws for it, but who cares? How does it help me in my life? What does that make me better? Is that good? Is that bad? I mean, in the US, people think, we're not make much money anymore if we have all these laws. So, is this a good idea? Should we have privacy? Should we not have privacy? Why should we have it? So, here's a very big statement from, you can probably take any country. I took it from the Australian Privacy Charter. a free and democratic society requires respect for the autonomy of individuals and limits on the power of both state and private organizations to intrude on that autonomy. Privacy is a key value which underpins human dignity and other key values such as freedom of association and freedom of speech. So, all clear, right? Privacy is the core ingredient of a democratic society. You need it to provide your citizens with autonomy, that they can be, what the Germans say, a mündiger Bürger, a person who is able to judge by himself with his own facilities what is good, what is bad, make the right decisions, vote for the right party. If we don't have privacy, people cannot make these choices. In contrast, you have people like Peter Cochrane. He was the former head of BT, British Telecom Research. And he wrote once an essay where he lamented all this secrecy, all this privacy stuff. It just makes life harder, more expensive, dangerous, and less serendipitous. Serendipitous basically means that, good things happening by chance. Like suddenly you find a coupon for a great thing you always wanted in your inbox. You always wanted to have that penis enlargement. Suddenly you have it in your inbox. That kind of fun thing that happened to you. And he gives an example of him, in the future having this smart card with my health records on there. Like, what is my blood type? What kind of problems do I have? What medical indications do I have for certain medicines? So I have this, and of course it's got to be protected, right? So there must be kind of password here that only I know and I can unlock it. But then I have this accident, the roadside accident. I have a car accident, and I lie unconscious on the street, and there's an ambulance coming, and they want to find out what is my blood type, what problems do I have, and they cannot read the card because they need my password, but I'm sleeping there. So bad. Just make it open, damn it. I don't care if people can. Why should they read my blood type? No secret. I can put it on my T-shirt, an A+ or something. I don't care. If it saves my life, okay. So very different ideas here about, is it good? Is it bad? Could be pretty bad. Who cares about key values here at that time? And then you have people like, I'm not sure if you still remember this guy, Scott McNealy. He was once a CEO of a very important company, Sun Microsystems. Do people know if this still exists? Yes. It's now bought by Oracle. Yes. So totally irrelevant. But you have no privacy anyway. Get over it. He made this once. Again, a transitory border in a sense. I'm not sure if he really liked this, but people picked it up and then made it into a big media thing. There's another person, come quickly, but basically what this boils down to, there's a very popular argument that's called the NTF argument. Remember that? It's hard to say. Spelled out is if you got nothing to hide, if you got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Okay? Nothing to hide, nothing to fear. That was a slogan of the UK government back in the 90s for increasing the number of cameras on the street. And the idea of that statement basically is that privacy is really about hiding something evil. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you have nothing to fear. You're good. We're only after the bad boys. All right? So if you have anything, it must be really, evil, or at least bad, or maybe at least unethical. Right? So if you're for privacy, so privacy laws really, in effect, only protect the crooks, the wrongdoers. They get all this terrorist, child molesters, and all that creepy stuff. And if you're law-abiding, then by all means, why should you not be for that kind of surveillance? And society overall will be better off without it. So that's a very different view there, and that's a very powerful argument. I mean, really, if I ask you, why would you not tell me your blood type? Well, what's the reason? There must be something wrong. Why would he not tell me otherwise? Where were you yesterday night? If you say, I don't tell you. See? So it's a very powerful argument. Here's one from a person who might be more known. I'm not sure if you can read this. If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Right? This is Google CEO. You heard that company maybe, although they're not as big here in Russia, but the rest of the world. Eric Schmidt. commenting on all these privacy issues and saying that, you know, if you don't want Google to know anything about this stuff, then maybe there's something wrong with you. Interesting enough, this guy is very privacy conscious. He always has these big battles with paparazzis and something want to take pictures of him and the family and writing about him. So maybe he has something that he's hiding. I don't know. Good. So this is it's a good argument. Here's an example of how a law-abiding citizen. There was an arson in a youth house near Niederwangen. I'm not sure you need to know this little tiny village in Switzerland. And at the scene of the crime, they found I'm not sure it was a screwdriver or maybe a hammer from a large supermarket chain, like a supermarket, a branded version. You know, this is called Migros. It's like one of the biggest supermarket chains in Switzerland, and they had a Migros tool, right? So it was clear that it was bought from that chain. And so after they didn't find anybody who could have been the arsonist, they ended up ordering the disclosure of all 133 customers who had bought these tools in any of the supermarkets in the country. So if you bought a hammer in one of these stores using your, I'm not sure if you have this in Russia too, these loyalty cards where you get points, right? They record, of course, what you buy. And then, well, if I can't find anybody, let's just see if one of these 133 people who bought a hammer could be my suspect. So suddenly all these 133 people became suspects in an arsonist investigation. Who knows, maybe they even got listed in some government file as being a suspect in an arsonist. Turns out none of those 133 was anywhere near that house that night. They all had perfect alibis. Lucky for them. What if you didn't have one and bought a hammer? As far as I know, they haven't found him yet, right? So who knows what they're putting next? Maybe pizza ordering or something, other stuff. So it's really. So there's a nice quote from I'm not sure if you have read the Three Musketeers, Cardinal de Richelieu. And he has a nice quote. Well, this is a real person. It really exists, not just a figure in a book. Give me 6 lines written by the most honorable of men, and I will find an excuse in them to hang them. So there's always something I can kind of use against you. There's always some stuff that I can reinterpret, like you buying a hammer. A hammer. That's strange. Why? Sorry, I just needed it. Oh, you needed it? For what? I don't know. I just wanted one. See? So, this is really interesting stuff. And there are many examples of that. There's I think like 3 years ago, there was in the UK an interesting case. There was a student arrested because his fingerprints was all over a set of letters that were stolen at one point. Remember, communication privacy, you're not allowed to mess with letters. They were stolen and then later recovered. So they found the letters, and then now they wanted to find out who stole those letters. And they found his fingerprints all over them. Luckily, right, so they checked out the database, and his prints came up, match. And they had collected his prints a year before because he was suspect. In some case, finally cleared. It wasn't him. The real culprit later said it was me, and so he was cleared. But they kept his fingerprints on file. You never know, right? Maybe he turns into terrorists. And then a year later, suddenly this mail is found, and his prints are on it. And we have the prints, so they arrested him. Found them, right? All the mail, all his prints on there. And he had to fight a long time until finally he could convince them that it was all his mail. He had sent it, right? But of course, once you say, it's clear evidence, right? Must be him. So suddenly you start to be the guy who has to prove that it wasn't me. And obviously that was an easy proof to do, right? Because probably it had his signature on there. But maybe he was just a student helper who sorted some mail of an institute. So he would need to work hard on proving that he was in the mailroom on that day, and these were the letters that he handled. Right? So this is gets quickly very hairy, even if you don't have anything to hide there. Good. Okay. So the issue here is really profiling. You become a data set, and from this data set we can infer things like you're a terrorist or you're a thief or something. But even if you don't look at that I'm not sure. You can maybe Google for that or whatever engine you use here. AOL Stalker, that's a very interesting case, but I'm not going to talk about this here. But basically these data points that people collect on you, they allow inferences. And these may not be true, or maybe they're true, but it's really hard to find out exactly. Maybe you have to collect more data to be sure. Who knows? That's maybe a case in point. The important thing is these data points that you collect on these people, they categorize you into something. Terrorist, thief, or maybe something like a high spender. You know, he's a good customer. Maybe someone who likes music. Or maybe someone who's a risky credit. So you shouldn't get a credit card. And this, as an effect, you might get good deals, or you might actually get denied service. You live in the wrong part of the town, sorry, no credit. There's been a few years back, Amazon did this thing where they had differential pricing. So depending on how you log in, you would see $9.99 for a DVD, or if you're not so important, $12.99. Right? So they had this per customer pricing. People hated it. Right? So it's really because suddenly you pay $15 for the CD that he gets for $9. Well, why? You know, he's a not important customer. He is the guy. Or maybe they know that he will buy it anyway. He's a fan. We've seen it. You know, he buys all the CDs. It's $15. And this guy, he's so, you know, he doesn't really take all the music, so we got to push it on him. $1.99. You know, buy it, damn it, buy it. Okay? So this is interesting. And, you know, your profile might give you away, and suddenly you get a different service. They stopped this. Obviously, they hadn't thought about this really, but they should have done it a different way. They should have said that it's regular price, $15.99, and you get a $10 discount because it's such a good customer. And then, oh, wow, you know, then you think like, I got to buy more, so I become a good customer. This is what David Lyons, a sociologist, calls social sorting. These opaque decisions that somewhere in the back, in the server room, some system makes on you that channel your life. Can you go to that school? Maybe. Can you buy that car? Do you get that offer? So there's a lot of stuff going on based on these profiles. Okay. So, actually I have 4 more slides. Let's just see if I can whip them through and then we can take a break. So, a last thought that I want to implant in your heads then is this idea of again, trying to understand the motivation for privacy, but now taking again a look at legal texts. And it's something that you have to do all the time, is you look at some law that was written 10 years, 50 years, 100 years back, and now you suddenly have this totally new technology, and you're like, now is that compatible with that law? Should that be banned as well, or should that be allowed? Because obviously people didn't know about cell phones 100 years back. Can we do this or not? So here's a Lawrence Lessig, great scholar. He wrote this interesting book, A Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. And he said there's many reasons for passing a law. And if you want to understand if a law applies to a different case, you have to understand the motivation for that law. Why was that created in the first place? And one would be, for example, empowerment. Right? I want to have a law for privacy that will give us ownership. You know, it's the dream of, mine. I can be empowered to give it away or not. Then you can see like a privacy law as a utility. If no one knows my email address, no one can spam me. Okay, that's just, it's not about my ownership, it's about being free from this nuisance of having to wade through hundreds of spam mails every day. Could be also about dignity. If people don't know so much about you, if you go and interview with us maybe tomorrow, and we have that 50-page folder on your life, there's a certain nakedness to it, right? That it's uneven. You don't have the same eye level there. Also, constraint of power. That's an interesting thing. Imagine that the government wants to enforce contraceptives. We need to multiply. Contraceptives are like, maybe Catholic. I'm not sure how it is here, but you're against contraception. You want more babies. It's important for us. So they want to ban the use of contraceptives. Now, imagine that you'd have a law that bans searches of bedrooms. And now you see that this law of banning the searches of bedrooms hinders the enforcement of that contraception law, because you can't look at the drawer to see if there are condoms in there or something, right? You can't really see there if there's... So it's this private space you can't get in, so you can't really pass that contraceptives law unless you carry them, around your neck or something. But usually people have them in the bedroom, in the drawer. or maybe your bathroom. So maybe you have a ban on bathroom too. So the point is, a law can limit what other laws you can pass. So maybe that's the reason for a law. Or it could just be a byproduct, because we couldn't do it better, so that's why we have a law. But so here's an example from the U.S. Constitution. It's the Fourth Amendment, and it basically says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the places to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So this was, again, when the U.S. Constitution was written, they just split from England, right, the evil English. And they had this tendency, while there was this recession going on there, to just unannounced in the middle of the night storm a house and search for papers where you wrote, let's revolt, something on there. So that was really, bad style. And when they created their country, they said, no more soldiers in my home. I'm secure against unreasonable, in the middle of the night, 20 soldiers, searches and seizures without any probable cause. They just kind of randomly come into a house because someone said he heard someone saying that I should be maybe. Right? That doesn't work. You have to have a warrant and all that stuff. So, now what about this law? Why did they come up with this? Well, maybe they had something dignity. If you're in your shorts and there's 20 soldiers, that's about dignity. I want to avoid this. Maybe it was about utility because I don't want to be waken up at night. Who knows? So the important question that, answering this is important. Why? Think about this same thing in the 21st century with Ubicom technology. Imagine that we have a law that requires all smart devices in your home, the smart fridge, the smart oven, to have home software in there, your PC, your MP3 player, that monitors illegal activities. Like the fridge detects human blood. Maybe it has a little chemical sniffer for explosives. Right? And as soon as something is detected illegal, there's an alert sent to a police station. Cool, right? Now, is that important thing? Of course, if you put milkshakes in there or whatever, there's no communication. Nothing is said about this, right? If you molest a child in your bedroom, alert. If you have sex with your overage partner, all good, no message. Is that compatible with the law? Is that unreasonable search and seizures? Obviously, there's no nuisance. You never get a stormtroop of soldiers in your bedroom at 1 a.m. in the morning, unless you're molesting a child right there. But then certainly it's not a nuisance, right? You have different problems. In order to decide that, I need to understand, why was this passed? What did the people think? Because obviously, if I have this new technology, there's no problem, right? No one reads your mail. No one knows what's in your fridge. Just the computer. And the computer just tells us if there's something wrong in this fridge. It's all good, right? So this is the kind of questions we have to think of if you look at how technology changes society, and that how law has to react to this. Okay, I think I'm going to just kind of skip over here, and let's just take a brief break, and I'm just going to, right. So this was my last slide. So the important thing is, all this data collection is really not so much about Orwell watching you. Not so much about these ever-looking eyes or something. Although this is, of course, an often cited problem. It's more like Franz Kafka. I'm not sure if you've heard of Franz Kafka. Do you know the trial? Yeah. Can you say briefly what the trial is about? The
man is accused in something he don't know what is that, and that he is
yeah. The whole book long he tries to find out, what is it? There's some data file out there that channels his life, and he doesn't even know where to. It's just like, there will be a trial, but don't worry about it. There will be a trial. And then like, what? Well, there will be a trial. So this is kind of the idea that data collection isn't really about evil people doing evil to you. Yeah, maybe too, the evil government, but it's really about these opaque choices in your life, that there's somewhere that says something about you and you can't do anything against it. You don't even know what it says about you, because some computer has some inference made on you. Okay, so hopefully I've motivated enough privacy that next time you're going to stand on the chairs and say privacy. We want privacy. Whenever someone has a talk that says data collection. So hopefully you're primed. We'll take a break now, I don't know, 15 minutes or something, or whatever, 10, whatever you need. And then we're going to move to the second part of looking at technology.